speak about Afghanistan. She'll offer some words at the top and then take a couple questions, and then we will resume with our regularly scheduled programming. So without further ado, Deputy Secretary.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I want to update all on the situation on the ground in Afghanistan. The State Department, I can tell you from personal experience, has been working around the clock to respond to an enormously challenging and fluid situation. This is absolutely an all-hands-on-deck effort to ensure the safety of our personnel and citizens, rally our allies and partners, and organize the evacuation of thousands and thousands of Afghans. In the last 24 hours, U.S. military flights evacuated approximately 2,000 more people. Over the last several days, we have processed more than 4,840 people for evacuation. We have communicated directly with all U.S. citizens who enrolled with Embassy Kabul with specific instructions about when and where to go for evacuation flights. Shortly, we will invite more than 800 Afghan special immigrant visa holders to board flights to the United States. We are beginning to expand our notifications and are expanding them to transmit information about evacuation options to each group. We will also continue to accelerate our efforts, including by working with our allies and partners, NGOs to identify and assist Afghans eligible for P1 or P2 refugee status and other Afghans at risk. We are continuing to surge resources here in Washington and at our missions around the world, including in Kabul, where our outstanding charge d'affaires and other staff remain on the ground, working tirelessly and with very little sleep, if any, to help American citizens, third country nationals, and Afghans who fear for their lives and wish to leave the country. Our former ambassador to Afghanistan, John Bass, will be on the ground in Kabul very shortly to support these efforts. He's already in the region. Major General Chris Donahue, the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, is also on his way, if not already in Kabul, to help facilitate the evacuation. Additional consular officers arrived in Kabul today, and we will nearly double the number of consular officers on the ground by Friday. Our diplomatic and military personnel are working in lockstep toward the same goal: to get as many people who want to leave Afghanistan and who are vulnerable to Taliban reprisals because they help the United States and our allies and partners, or who are otherwise at risk because of who they are, or what they do, or what they believe, out of the country as quickly and as safely as possible. The events and images of the last week have been wrenching for all of us. I'm sure for you as well. Thousands of State Department personnel have served in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades, many more than once. An entire generation of diplomats were called to join the Foreign Service after the September 11th attacks. And even those of us who haven't served in Afghanistan ourselves know many who have. The men and women of the State Department have built deep, enduring relationships with Afghan citizens who want the same things that people everywhere want: education and economic opportunity for themselves and for their children, a free press that can speak truth to power, freedom to live without fear of violence or oppression, equality for women and girls, a good life. We will stand with those who have stood with us. From the State Department and across the federal government, we are simultaneously pursuing multiple lines of effort to respond to the situation on the ground in Afghanistan. We are in contact with our locally employed embassy staff and are offering the opportunity to evacuate with their families if they choose to do so. We are continuing to process visas for Afghans eligible for SIV status and their families. For those who are early in the process, we are working with our allies and partners to move them to third countries while their paperwork is completed. We are also urgently accelerating our efforts to assist eligible Afghans under the Priority 1 and Priority 2, P1 and P2, referrals to U.S. refugee admissions program and humanitarian parole. And we are working on our own with our allies and partners and with NGOs to identify and assist other Afghans at risk, including women and girls, human rights defenders, journalists, and other civil society actors. We have seen reports that the Taliban, contrary to their public statements and their commitments to our government, are blocking Afghans who wish to leave the country from reaching the airport. Our team in Doha and our military partners on the ground in Kabul are engaging directly with the Taliban to make clear that we expect them to allow all American citizens, all third country nationals, and all Afghans who wish to leave to do so safely and without harassment. A majority of the world's nations this morning, as of this morning, 109 governments and counting, have come together to underscore the same message. The State Department is tirelessly pursuing diplomatic efforts with our allies and partners in every region of the world to mobilize resources to save Afghan lives. As you know, Secretary Blinken has spoken to more than a dozen of his counterparts in recent days, some of them multiple times. I've been doing the same. This morning, Undersecretary of State Nuland and I convened the deputy foreign ministers and political directors from more than a dozen allies. I think we had 20 on the phone, and partners to encourage everyone to take additional steps to help the Afghan people. Our ambassadors are working day and night in capitals around the world. Our undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, senior bureau officials, desk officers are doing the same. Our support staff are doing the same. As I said, this is an all-hands-on-deck effort, and we aren't going to let up. On the political front, we saw a very strong statement on Monday from the UN Security Council, including China and Russia. They reiterated the need for an inclusive, just, durable, and realistic political settlement that protects human rights, including for women, children, and minorities. President Biden and Prime Minister Boris Johnson agreed yesterday to hold a virtual G7 leaders meeting on Afghanistan next week. And earlier today, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced he is convening a virtual meeting of NATO foreign ministers on Friday to discuss our common approach. The United States and the international community have also been extremely clear. We remain committed to combating terrorism in Afghanistan and will not tolerate a government that allows Afghanistan to once again become a safe haven for terrorists. As President Biden said, the United States will maintain a laser focus on our counterterrorism mission in Afghanistan and in other parts of the world, and we will hold the Taliban accountable to the commitments they made in the 2020 agreement and those they have made since, that they will not allow terrorist groups that threaten the United States or its allies to operate on Afghan soil. Before I take your questions, I want to speak to a situation that's very personal to me, facing Afghan women and children. Yesterday, the Taliban held a press conference where they claimed they intend to allow women to work and study, but only within what they called their, quote, frameworks. The United States and the international community will be vigilant in monitoring how any future government in Afghanistan ensures the rights and freedoms that women and girls in that country have come to expect. The United States joined 20 other nations this morning in jointly affirming that commitment. As I said, this is personal for me, as it is for many people here at the State Department and across the federal government. In 1997, I joined then Secretary of State Albright when she visited Afghan women and girls in a refugee camp in Peshawar, Pakistan. Secretary Albright told them, quote, "It is impossible to modernize a nation if half or more of the population is left behind," unquote. That was one of the most searing meetings I have had as a diplomat. I had a teenage daughter at the time. A young teenager told me about watching her sister being raped and thrown out a window. Women who were doctors and teachers and homemakers talked about how they couldn't do and have their lives anymore. That memory will never be wiped from my mind. Societies could not flourish and prosper without the full participation of women and girls back then, and they cannot flourish and prosper without women and girls now. In the last 20 years, Afghan women and girls have embraced their freedom. Millions have gone to school. They have become doctors, lawyers, journalists, parliamentarians, and entrepreneurs. They have built the lives that Secretary Albright encouraged them to imagine all those years ago, and so much more. When I was Undersecretary for Political Affairs during the Obama administration, I traveled to Kabul and to Herat. I met with women and girls in both cities and saw the amazing things they'd accomplished, their talent, their drive, the vibrancy of the society they were working so hard to build. And I have met with Afghan women leaders in my time as Deputy Secretary of State as well, to hear from them about their tireless efforts to educate women and girls. These ambitions, these dreams, and above all the concrete progress they have made for themselves, their families, their neighbors, and their country, are all things I carry with me every single day. The United States and our allies and partners will continue to fight for Afghan women and girls, and Secretary Blinken and the President of the United States join me in that drive. We are working with the international community to help those who are vulnerable who are facing Taliban reprisals to get to safety. And we will use every economic, diplomatic, and political tool we have to hold the Taliban accountable to their words and more. With that, I'll take your questions.